Montana Territory. 1883, the wind cut sharp through the Bitterroot Valley, but Eden Oaks barely noticed. She had a basket of eggs on her hip and mud caked to the hem of her dress. The earth clung to her like everything else. She could not shake the loneliness, the silence, the dull ache of being passed over. She was 23 and had not once been courted. Not truly. Not with roses or letters or a hand reaching back for hers. Folks said she was good stock and a hard worker, but when it came to marriage, men looked right through her like she was smoke on the wind. Eden glanced toward the narrow road that led to the ranch. A rider was coming. Fast. Dust kicked up behind the horse and she stepped forward instinctively, shielding her eyes. The man reined in before her in a smooth stop. He was tall, lean, his hat low and dark hair curling beneath it. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, sharp even through the dust. "You the one who owns this land?" he asked, voice deep but not rough. Eden straightened. "I work it. My father passed last spring." He swung down from the saddle. "Name's Xander Dole. I was told to head north to Fort Missoula, but my horse stepped wrong and I saw your barn first." She noticed the limp in the horse's back leg and nodded. "You can put him in the stall. There's warm mash and clean hay." He gave a grateful nod. "You sure? I do not leave animals to suffer." Xander smiled then, just a little, not polite but real. "Thank you, miss." "Oaks, Eden Oaks." "Well, Eden Oaks, you just saved my horse." She didn't answer, just led him toward the barn. Inside, she watched as he worked gentle with the animal, calm hands on the leg, murmuring to the gelding like it was a child. She found herself staring, then looking away too fast when he glanced up. He stayed the night, slept in the hayloft without asking for more. Come morning, he helped her lift a broken fence post without being told and fixed the hinge on the chicken coop door. "You got no one else here?" he asked as they ate supper that evening, bare beans and cornbread. Eden hesitated. "Not anymore. Mama died when I was 8. My brother left for Denver 6 years ago, never wrote back." He looked at her differently then. Not with pity, just understanding. That night, she stood outside on the porch, arms crossed against the chill. Xander came up beside her after setting the lantern down inside. "You do not talk much," he said. "I talk plenty, just not about things that do not matter." He looked out over the darkened land. "Seems like a quiet life." "It is." He glanced at her. "You like quiet," she shrugged. "Better than noise with no meaning." Xander nodded. "Yeah. I get that." He left the next morning. Said he had to keep north. Said thank you again. Touched the brim of his hat and rode off before she could even say goodbye proper. But he came back. 3 weeks later, in the middle of a snow flurry, she heard a knock on the door. She opened it, and there he stood, hat dusted in white, coat buttoned to the throat. "I got as far as Missoula," he said, "but I could not stop thinking about your eggs and your fence and the way you said you do not talk about things that do not matter." Eden stared, heart hammering. "So I came back to see if maybe I could stay a spell. Help you out. I will earn my keep." She stepped aside without a word. Over the next month, he became part of the land. He dug irrigation trenches, fixed a busted axle on her wagon, and built a new coop door from scrap wood. He worked beside her, sunup to sundown. Every evening, they ate together. Sometimes silent, sometimes not. One night, she found herself laughing, really laughing for the first time in years when he told her about a horse in Wyoming that had stolen his boot and dropped it in a river. He just watched her with that quiet smile, like the sound of her laugh meant something. But even then, she did not let herself believe it. She knew what she looked like. Plain brown hair always tied back, wide shoulders from lifting sacks of feed, no softness in her voice, no flutter in her step. She had never been the girl men wrote poems about. She was the kind they passed over for someone with ribbons in her hair and a soft smile. One afternoon, She stood by the creek, washing linens in the cold water. She looked up to see Xander watching her from the slope, leaning on a fence post. "What?" she asked, breath catching. He walked down to her, slow and steady. "I have been thinking about something." She wrung out a sheet. "You think a lot. Only about things that matter." She looked away, but he stepped closer. "I keep wondering if you know what you look like when you are working, how your brow furrows when you are thinking, how your hands, they are calloused," she said quickly. "Rough, I know," he shook his head. "I was going to say steady. You hold things like nothing could shake you." She dropped the sheet back into the water. "Eden," he said quietly, "I have seen enough women in my life to know pretty when I see it, but you are more than that. You are all I can see." She froze. "I do not care about ribbons or soft voices. I care about the way you carry this whole place like it is nothing. The way you do not flinch. The way you laugh when you think no one is listening." Her voice wavered. "I am not the kind men fall for." "I am not men," he said. "I am me, and I am falling." She looked at him, really looked. And something opened inside her like sunlight after a long, bitter winter. She stepped forward, just enough that their hands brushed. "You mean it?" she asked. He nodded. "Every word." She let out a breath she had been holding for years. And for the first time in her life, Eden Oaks let herself be seen. Xander stayed through the spring thaw, and Eden never asked when he meant to leave again. The rhythm of their days shifted without discussion, 2 sets of hands instead of 1, 2 sets of boots by the door, 2 voices low in the evenings when the wind pressed against the walls. The lambing came early that year. One ewe struggled in the frost-slick field, and Eden had already rolled up her sleeves when she heard Xander behind her. "I'll hold her steady," he said, already kneeling across from her. She didn't look up. "You know what to do. I've helped before." His voice was level. "Just tell me what you need." When the lamb came, slick and gasping, Eden wrapped it in burlap and held it close to her chest. Xander rubbed the mother's side, murmuring something too low to catch. The ew's breathing slowed and the lamb blinked in the moonlight. Eden looked over at him, mud on his knees, hands raw from the cold. Later, inside, she poured hot water into the basin and he washed the blood from his arms. She passed him a clean towel without speaking. His fingers brushed hers. "You've got away with animals," she said, eyes on the basin. "I think they just know I won't rush them," he answered. She nodded once. "That helps." He didn't say anything else, just folded the towel and left it beside the stove. By late April, the valley greened and the snow melted from the low hills. Xander spent his mornings mending a stretch of fence along the creek, while Eden worked the kitchen garden. One evening, she found him carving something on the porch with his pocket knife. "You always whittle after supper?" she asked, leaning against the post. "Only when I'm thinking." She stepped closer. "What about?" He turned the piece of wood in his hand. It was rough still, but the shape of a small bird had begun to emerge. "My brother used to do this. Said it kept the hands busy when the mind couldn't settle." "You don't talk about him." "Not much to say," he replied. "He joined the cavalry, rode east, never came back." Eden sat beside him. "My brother left too, Denver, ain't heard a word since." Xander looked over at her. "You write him, once, years ago, came back unopened." He nodded slowly and silence stretched between them, not heavy, just real. "I never figured I'd stay in one place," he said after a while. "Didn't seem I had reason to. And now," he set the bird down between them. "Now I'm learning the shape of things." She traced the small wing with one finger. "That's so." He didn't answer, just looked at her like he was committing something to memory. The next week, a letter arrived from a neighbor 10 miles east, asking for help clearing brush near the river. Xander offered to go, said he'd be back by Sunday. "You sure about riding alone?" Eden asked, handing him a wrapped loaf. "Been managing by myself long enough," he said. "But I'll miss supper." She didn't answer, just closed the bundle and handed it to him. That night the house felt too still. Without his boots on the porch or his voice low near the fire, the shadows felt longer. She tried to read by lamplight, but the words wouldn't stay still on the page. Sunday came with a heavy sky. The wind rose around mid-morning, and with it the scent of rain. By dusk, Eden had set an extra plate at the table and lit the lamp early. He didn't come. She didn't sleep much. The next morning she hitched the wagon herself. The road was soft and rutted, but she pressed on, worry biting deep. By midday she found him near the ridge, leading his horse on foot. The animal limped badly and Xander had a gash across his temple. She jumped down before the wagon had stopped. "What happened?" Landslide took a chunk of the trail. "Horse stumbled. I hit rock." "Why didn't you wait for someone to ride back with you?" He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "I said I'd be home Sunday." She stared at him, chest tight. "You could have died out here." "I didn't." She stepped closer, hand trembling as she reached up to touch the edge of the bandage tied around his brow. "Don't do that again. Not alone." His voice was quiet. "All right." She helped him into the wagon and drove them home in silence, but her hand stayed close to his the entire ride. That evening, while he rested on the porch bench with a blanket over his lap, Eden brought him a tin cup of broth. He took it with a nod. "You didn't have to come after me," he said. She sat beside him. "I know, but I did." He turned toward her. "You were worried." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The wind moved through the grass beyond the fence line. Eden looked out at the fields, then back at him. "I'm not used to needing someone," she said. "I'm not used to being needed." They sat in silence again, but this time it was full of something waiting. He reached for her hand, slow and sure. "Maybe we learn together," he said. She didn't pull away, didn't speak either. Just laced her fingers through his and held on. By early May, the cottonwoods along the Bitterroot had leafed out fully, their pale green shimmer catching the late light. Eden stood barefoot in the garden rows, ankle deep in dirt that had finally warmed. She was thinning turnips when she heard the barn door creak open behind her. Xander stepped out, arm in a sling, his shirt collar open at the throat. The gash above his temple had scabbed over clean, but the bruising ran deep, fading slow beneath his skin. "You ought to be resting," she said without turning. "I've rested enough to grow moss. That horse of yours still limps. You want to match him." He stepped into the rows, careful not to disturb her seedlings. "I ain't built for idleness." She kept thinning in silence until he crouched beside her with his good arm, not saying anything more. The sun dipped lower, gold light catching on the edge of his jaw where the bruises hadn't reached. "You ever think of leaving here?" he asked finally, voice low. She dropped a turnip seedling, rubbed her palms on her apron. "Used to. When I was younger, thought maybe I'd go east. Be a seamstress in one of those cities with gas lamps and streetcars." "What stopped you?" She looked over at the house, the weather-worn roof, the clothesline still pinned with yesterday's wash. "Didn't want to vanish." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I figured if I left the land, left the house, I'd disappear into something I didn't know how to be. There's no place out there that remembers me." Xander looked down at the soil between them. "I never stayed long enough anywhere for a place to remember me." She dusted her hands off and stood. "Then I suppose we're even." That night, the wind shifted. It came down from the north, carrying the scent of pine and last year's fires. Eden pulled the shutters tight while Xander stoked the stove slower than usual. "You ever think about children?" he asked as he ladled stew into bowls. She paused with the tin cups. "Some." "You think you'd want them?" "Here, I mean." She set the cups down, met his gaze across the table. "If they could run barefoot in summer and know where their supper comes from." "Yes," he nodded. "I never had much of a picture of it, but lately I keep seeing little boots by the door." She didn't answer right away. Just passed him bread that had cooled too long, her fingers brushing his. "You think we're dreaming too fast?" she asked. He shook his head. "I think we're naming what's already here." Late that week, while hauling water from the spring, Eden watched a pale bluebird land on the fence post. She stood still as breath, remembering the carving Xander had left on the porch rail. The bird's chest puffed once, then it flew off into the low trees. Inside, she found him sanding the edge of a small cedar box. He looked up when she leaned in the doorway. "You made that for something," he wiped his hands on a cloth. "Thought maybe you could keep your letters in it if you ever write any more." She crossed to the table. "I might." He passed it to her. The lid fit snug without a hinge, the grain smooth as river stone. Inside, he'd lined the bottom with soft wool cloth. "I can't repay this," she said. "It's not for paying." She held it for a long moment, then set it down gently. "You've given me more than you know." He looked up at her, eyes steady. "I know what I've found here, Eden." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Tell me." "I found a place that feels like mine, not because of the walls or the land, because of you." She felt her breath catch but didn't look away. He stood slowly, favoring his shoulder. "I want to stay. Not just through summer, not just until the fence line's right again." She reached up, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw where the bruise had faded. "Then stay." There was no rush between them, no fire sparked from nowhere. Just that slow, certain warmth that had grown between fence posts and lambing fields, over shared work and unspoken trust. He took her hand, kissed the back of it once. "I ain't ever known quiet could feel like belonging." She pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes. "Neither did I." And the wind outside, still coming down from the hills, carried no storm. Just the hush of pine and the sound of two people no longer waiting. The summer crept in slow, with lilac blooming along the creek banks and the scent of damp earth rising after early rains. Eden had begun letting the chickens roam farther from the coop, and Xander had cleared a patch near the north fence where the soil turned loamy and dark. He said it would be good for beans, that he liked them pole-grown and climbing, like they had somewhere to go. One morning, Eden found a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the box he'd carved. It wasn't a letter exactly, just a few lines in his uneven hand, listing seed types and planting dates, but the care in it made her pause. She pressed her thumb to the edge of the wood and left the box open on her windowsill. When she stepped outside, Xander was sawing boards beneath the eaves, sleeves rolled, sawdust streaking his forearms. "You're building something?" she asked. "Ladder for the new loft shelf." "You said you'd been meaning to reach it." She hadn't remembered saying that aloud, but she didn't question it. After supper that evening, they sat on the porch while the sky turned the color of river clay. Xander had a length of rawhide in his hands and was braiding it with more focus than the task required. "You ever think about teaching?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Teaching what? Horses, fences, keeping things alive." He set the braid aside. "Never figured anyone'd want to learn from me." "You've got sense in your hands," she said. "That counts more than some book." He leaned back, boots planted steady on the planks. "You think there's a boy or girl out here who'd trade schoolhouse hours for the way I talk to a plow mule?" she shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe one who needs to know how to fix a broken axle with nothing but twine and a calm voice." He was quiet a moment, then nodded once. "I'd try." "If someone asked." She rested her elbow on the armrest, chin in her hand. "I'd ask." He looked over, something thoughtful behind his eyes. "You always notice what folks can do, don't you? Only if they're worth noticing." The next week, the neighbor's boy rode over with a message from town. There was to be a midsummer gathering near the trading post, dancing, pies, a bit of music hauled in all the way from Helena. Eden watched the boy ride off, dust trailing behind him. She didn't mention the letter until evening when she found Xander sanding the edge of a cabinet they'd pulled from the barn loft. "There's a dance," she said, folding her arms. "They'll have fiddle tunes and cider. It's in 2 days." He looked up. "You planning to go?" "I haven't decided." "You want to?" She hesitated. "Folks'll be there, ones I've known since I was a child. They'll notice I'm not alone anymore." "You worried what they'll say?" She looked at him levelly. "I've lived too long worrying what they didn't say." He stood, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "Then let's give them something to speak on." She'd never owned a dress for dancing, just Sunday skirts and cotton blouses patched at the elbows, but she found a ribbon in her mother's old sewing box, tucked beneath buttons and bits of trim. It was faded blue, soft at the edges. She tied it into her braid without thinking too hard. Xander wore his cleanest shirt, the collar creased straight, and she noticed he'd polished his boots until they shone in the lantern light. The gathering was already in full swing when they arrived, lanterns strung between posts, tables lined with pies and stews, a battered fiddle singing its way through a reel. Eden kept close to the edge, her hands clasped tight. It had been years since she'd stood among so many. Xander offered his arm. "You trust me," she nodded, and he led her forward. They didn't spin or twirl like the others. They moved slow, steady, his hand sure at the small of her back. She followed his lead with a quiet grace, her boots brushing the packed earth in time with the music. When the tune slowed, he leaned close. "You don't disappear in a crowd," he said. "You change the shape of it." She looked up at him, startled. "I see you," he said softly, "always." She didn't answer with words, just rested her cheek to his shoulder, the ribbon in her braid brushing his collarbone. Later, they walked home under a sky thick with stars. The road curved gently between fields, and she let her hand slip into his without hesitation. "You ever think," she said quietly, "that we might have missed each other if your horse hadn't stumbled?" He squeezed her hand. "I've thought about that every day." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "I don't need a ribbon or a dance," she said. "I just need you to stay." "I already have," he said. "You just hadn't noticed yet." She reached up, touched his face where the skin had healed smooth. "I notice everything." He kissed her then, not rushed, not uncertain. Just the kind of kiss that comes after long days, after silence shared and work done side by side. The kind that feels like a gate swinging open at last. And she knew, with the earth beneath her and the stars above, that plane had never meant invisible. That in the eyes of the man beside her, she'd never once been unseen. By late August, the heat hung over the land like a held breath. The grass along the southern fence went yellow, brittle underfoot, and the creek had drawn back to a narrow silver thread. Eden stood in the kitchen, elbows deep in flour, rolling dough for preserves that would carry them through winter. A swarm of bees clung to the outside sill, their hum steady and low, and she watched them a moment before returning to her work. Xander came in from the pasture with a sun-worn hat in his hand and sweat darkening the back of his shirt. He moved slower now, not from injury, but from a kind of settled rhythm that had found them both since the night of the dance. There was no more skirting around what was between them, only the quiet certainty of two people who had chosen to stay. "I ran into Miles at the east boundary," he said, wiping his brow. "He asked if we'd consider leasing out the flat stretch past the cottonwoods. Says his youngest wants to start a herd of his own." Eden turned the dough and dusted it with more flour. "That boy's got fire in him. He'd work it honest." Xander leaned against the doorframe. "He said he'd trade fence posts and labor for the first year's rent." She glanced up. "You thinking we're ready to share the land?" "I'm thinking we've built more than we'll ever use alone." She gave a quiet nod. Let him. That evening they sat at the table with the ledger open between them. Eden ran her finger down the list of provisions, pausing at the sacks of flour and the dwindling line of salt pork. "We'll need to ride into town before the first frost," she said. "It's a full day's trip each way. I'd rather not leave the chickens unattended." "I'll go," Xander said. "Take the wagon. If I leave before sunup, I can be back by the second morning." She hesitated. "What if I came with you?" He looked up. "You sure? I haven't seen more than this valley in 2 years. Might be time." They left before the stars faded, with jars of canned fruit packed beneath the wagon seat, and Eden's braid tied with a strip of cotton she'd torn from a curtain. The road to town was dry and rough, but the air carried the faint scent of pine pitch and dusted clover, and the hills opened wide as they crested the ridge. In town, Eden kept close to Xander's side. She hadn't stood in a mercantile since the spring her father passed, and the crush of voices made her fingers twitch. But Xander never rushed her. He let her choose her own bolts of muslin and the tin scoop for the feed bin. And when she paused longest over a small spool of dark green thread, he reached for it without asking. "You'll need it," he said, "when your old skirts start to fray." At the livery, while the wagon was being reloaded, a woman in a pressed blouse stopped beside Eden with a curious glance. She was older, with a firm set mouth and a pinched brow. "You're Oakes's daughter, aren't you?" the woman asked. "Didn't think you'd stayed on out there." Eden stood tall. "I did." The woman looked her over, eyes flicking to Xander, who was wiping down a bridle. "That your husband?" "Not yet," Eden said, clear and without apology. The woman blinked, then nodded once and walked away. Xander came up beside her, a faint crease between his brows. "You all right?" she asked a question. "I gave an answer." He touched the back of her hand. "You want that to change?" She didn't look at him, just watched the clouds thicken above the hills. "I want what we've already begun." That night, they camped beneath a cottonwood where the road curved homeward. The fire was small, the night air mild, and they sat close, knees touching beneath the blanket. "I never asked you proper," Xander said, voice quiet beneath the stars. "I didn't want to crowd you." Eden turned to him. "You don't crowd." He reached into his coat and pulled a small silver ring, plain but polished. "I traded for it in town, thought maybe you'd wear it if you wanted to." She didn't speak right away. Just reached for his hand and slid the ring over her own, where it caught the firelight like a promise. "I do want to," she said. "I've wanted to for some time." They returned home the next morning, and the house felt different, lighter somehow. Eden set the ring on the windowsill beside the carved box, where it caught the morning sun, and they went to work without needing to say much. That fall, they married in the yard beneath the spruce tree. Miles brought his boy, and the neighbor girl from across the ridge brought a pie so sweet Eden laughed at the first bite. There was no preacher, just vows spoken plain and hands held firm. Winter came early, but the root cellar was full, the barn tight against the wind. Xander built a cradle from pine boards left behind by Eden's father, and though neither of them said it aloud, they both looked to the future with quiet expectation. On the coldest mornings, Eden would wake to find the stove already lit and Xander's boots gone from beside the door. He always returned with a pail of water or a handful of kindling. She never asked where he'd gone, she already knew. And each evening, as the fire burned low, they sat together in the hush between chores, her hand resting over his, the weight of the ring steady and sure. They didn't speak of the years before. They didn't need to. What they had now was built from each of them showing up every morning, every season, every small, wordless act. And in that house near the edge of the Bitterroot, where the land met sky and the silence once felt too wide, there lived a woman who had never left, and a man who had come back, and they grew old not with regret, but with roots.